There are currently no signs that Belarus is preparing for a ground invasion of Ukraine. This was reported by the American Institute for the Study of War. Analysts note that they have not observed any buildup of the Belarusian armed forces on the Belarusian-Ukrainian border, and therefore the country is unlikely to launch an attack. In addition, according to experts, Russia would not be able to support Belarusian troops in the event of an invasion, as it lacks the necessary reserves. Andriy Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, is joining us live. Andriy, greetings. Good morning.
Greetings, Ole.
So we've already started talking here about Belarus. They claimed there were supposedly over 100 incursions by Ukrainian drones during the week. You called this an attempt, your agency called this an attempt to shift responsibility onto Ukraine. How can you distinguish a real border threat from what's called an information psychological operation, that is, an information operation from the people who in fact control power in Belarus?
Well, actually, these are absurd statements about hundreds per week, or that they supposedly detect combat drones flying from Ukraine into Belarus every day. Well, I remember when Lukashenko used to talk about tons of weapons being brought in, moved from Ukraine into Belarus. Well, in fact, by saying this, he actually undermines the work of his own border units, who apparently are not intercepting what is supposedly coming from Ukraine. Now, they're already talking about drones on their side. Again, this is an attempt to shift responsibility, to blame Ukraine for something, or even, to prepare the ground for justifying that from the territory of Belarus, specifically from this country, Russian attack drones, Shaheds, Gerans are flying into our territory. And over the past few days, such incidents have been recorded because, in fact, when Russia launches its attack drones, it tries to direct them along the Dnipro riverbed near the border, or as close as possible to the border, including those that fly specifically through the territory of Belarus. And let's remember that various relays are also stationed on the territory of Belarus to strengthen the signal for these drones. Therefore, probably it's not really worth, of course, reacting to such statements from Belarus when they accuse Ukraine of something. But we must be ready again for any developments, because all of this can later be used by them precisely for greater aggression. All the more so because if Russia is now pressuring Belarus to get it to join the war against our country on a larger scale with its own forces, we must have strong defensive positions along the entire length of the border with Belarus. This applies to Volyn region, to Chernihiv region, and to other regions that border this country as well.
You mentioned that currently there are no strike groups detected near the Belarusian-Ukrainian border, on the Belarusian side, obviously, but still, the threat remains. Are there any signs, and do such signs exist, that this could actually be real preparation and not just certain maneuvers, certain drills, or, again, an attempt to exert psychological pressure?
Well, this will again be the task of the Ukrainian intelligence units to determine and obtain the necessary information that would indicate that at some point forces have been amassed in order to move them even towards our border with our country. As of now, if we talk about the technical means of surveillance that we use, such as video surveillance systems or unmanned aerial vehicles, we do not observe any forces having already amassed in the immediate vicinity of our border. However, once again, there is pressure from Russia on Belarus, as well as the possibility that in the future, Russia could transfer its forces to the territory of Belarus. And unfortunately, Belarus, as a country that supports the terrorist state, will willingly provide its infrastructure facilities. As for the bases, the deployment of these units is once again intended to increase the threat to our country.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Andriy, for the prompt information. Andriy Demchenko, let me remind you, spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, was with us live. And we were discussing the current situation, particularly at the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. It's 12 minutes past 8 in Ukraine. Russia is threatening Britain's critical infrastructure. This was warned by the country's intelligence service. The government communications headquarters accused the Kremlin of a series of espionage plots and of waging an undeclared hybrid war on British territory, stating that the Russians aim to destroy the country's infrastructure, democratic processes, and supply chains. In addition, Britain is at a critical moment, so the intelligence services, together with their partners, are countering cyber attacks, sabotage, and other threats from Russia. Ukraine, together with its partners, has agreed on priorities ahead of the next meeting in the Ramstein format. Among the main priorities are strengthening air defense and countering Russian ballistic missiles. This was reported by Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. The day before, he spoke with his German and British counterparts, Boris Pistorius and John Healey, as well as with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. According to Fedorov, Ukraine needs additional supplies of artillery shells and funding to increase the production of Ukrainian drones. The official also added that international support must quickly be transformed into concrete results. Meanwhile, Estonia supports Ukrainian drone strikes on targets in Russia. This was reported by the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, while also urging Kiev to exercise caution. The ministry noted Vladimir Putin wants the countries where drones enter their territory to demand an end to the attacks, but that will not happen. Let's listen.
Russia is deliberately pushing these drones into NATO territory, while simultaneously spreading the false narrative that NATO, we, the Baltic countries, and Finland have officially allowed Ukraine to use our territory for these attacks. This is not true. We have never allowed this. We would like Ukraine to be more cautious if you are striking at the lifelines of the Russian war machine in Uсть-Luga, St. Petersburg, and elsewhere. This is very close to our borders. Putin is deeply concerned because almost 60% of gas and oil exports go through these ports. Therefore, Ukraine must continue. Margus Tsakna, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia.
The Ministry of Defense, together with the General Staff, is launching a new program called Logistics Lockdown. This concerns increasing strikes on the nearest Russian rear. This was reported by Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. According to him, the cost of advancement for the Russian army is rising, and the main pattern is the more enemy logistics are destroyed, the fewer assaults take place on the battlefield. Therefore, the task of the Ukrainian military is to increase pressure on the enemy, both in the rear, and to deprive them of the ability to conduct active offensives. Support for Ukraine will be one of the main topics at the upcoming NATO summit. This will take place in Ankara. A statement from the heads of Ukraine's mission to NATO, in particular Aliona Hetmanchuk, speaks about this. According to her, there are ongoing complex discussions within the alliance regarding a new model of assistance to Kyiv. In particular, they are discussing Secretary-General Mark Rutte's proposal to allocate 0.25% of the GDP of all member countries to support Ukraine. Let's listen to these words.
We are among the priorities of the summit. That is why there is such an active discussion about the distribution of the financial burden among NATO countries. Because, let's be honest, it's not really reasonable when, out of all the declared contributions for military aid to Ukraine this year, in reality just 2 countries will cover almost half of all contributions. Aliona Hetmanchuk, head of Ukraine's mission to NATO.